In the heart of a bright, frozen winter, a Navy SEAL and his German Shepherd rescue dog arrive at a home carved into the face of a mountain. It's the last thing his grandmother left behind. But the moment they step inside, the dog stops and listens. Not to the wind, not to the snow, but to something hidden deep beneath the stone, a secret powerful enough to change an entire town, and the man who was never meant to find it. If you believe in loyalty, instinct, and truth that refuses to stay buried, subscribe now and follow this unforgettable story. Spokane, Washington wore winter-like polished armor. The daylight was brutally bright, a clean blade of sun reflecting off snowbanks and iced-over sidewalks until the whole city seemed forged from glass. Every rooftop carried a white crown. Every pine bough sagged under fresh powder. And the Spokane River, visible in flashes between bridges and brick buildings, moved with a dark, steady patience as if it had learned long ago that cold never lasts forever, only long enough to test what is true. Ryan Walker moved through that brightness as though it belonged to someone else. He was 35, broad-shouldered, built the way hard work and harder discipline shape a man, yet he carried himself with the slight inward angle of someone who expected the world to swing at him when he wasn't looking. His face had sharp lines, high cheekbones, a square jaw, and the kind of quiet, weathered severity that came from years of sun glare on open water and snow glare on hostile ground. A faint scar cut along the edge of his right eyebrow, pale against wind-reddened skin. Dark hair, kept short, grew uneven at the crown like he'd trimmed it with impatience rather than vanity. He wore a few days' stubble, coarse, dark, the kind that made him look older when the light hit it wrong. His eyes were gray-blue, steady and tired, the color of winter steel. People sometimes mistook that stare for anger. It wasn't. It was vigilance that never turned off. He wore his Navy working uniform the way a man wears a vow. The digital camouflage ran continuous across the entire jacket, front placket, chest area, pocket flaps, no solid color panels anywhere, the pattern unbroken like a rule he refused to compromise. The pants matched, the same green digital mosaic, scuffed at the knees from too many hours on unforgiving ground. On anyone else it might have looked like costume. On Ryan, it looked like a second skin he hadn't learned how to shed. He had been out long enough that civilians didn't always know what they were looking at, but they still sensed the discipline stitched into his posture, the controlled economy of motion, the way he scanned corners and exits without making a show of it. There had been an incident years ago, one ugly night overseas when a safe perimeter wasn't safe, when the wrong sound arrived a half-second too late. Since then, sleep had become a rumor. Even in Spokane's bright mornings, some part of him stayed in the dark, listening. At his left heel walked the only creature who didn't ask him to be anyone else. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, large and powerfully built, with a thick, natural coat meant for cold work and long miles. His coloring was dark sable with a heavy black overlay, his back and neck soaked in deep black like ink spilled over fur, his body shifting into rich, dark sable brown, and his legs and underside warmed by tan that looked almost golden against the snow. No silver, no gray, no sheen like polished metal, just honest fur, dense and practical, the kind you could bury your face in and believe in. His ears stood upright, always moving, always measuring the world. His eyes were amber, not soft, not cruel, focused, intelligent, old-souled. Ryan called him Warden, partly as a joke and partly because it was true. The dog guarded the parts of Ryan that Ryan couldn't protect by himself. They'd been sleeping wherever the night allowed, cheap motels when Ryan had cash, the back corner of a shelter when he didn't, sometimes the sheltered side of a building where wind couldn't bite too hard. Spokane had resources, but winter sharpened hunger and pride into the same blade. Ryan's pride had always been a difficult thing, not loud, not boastful, but stubborn, forged from a lifetime of never asking for help until it was nearly too late. Warden didn't care about pride. Warden cared about survival and about Ryan and about the invisible strings of intention that made people either safe or dangerous. That morning, they were at a community kitchen near downtown where the windows sweated from heat and the air smelled of coffee, toast, and damp wool drying too slowly. People moved in layered coats, faces pinched by cold and circumstance. The place was busy but not chaotic, more like a tired ship that still knew how to stay afloat. Ryan sat at a metal table with a paper cup of coffee and a slice of toast that tasted like smoke and yesterday. He ate anyway, not because it was good, but because routine was a rope you could hold when the rest of life tried to pull you under. Warden lay beside the table, paws crossed neatly, his head up, his gaze sweeping the room with professional calm. A volunteer walked by and offered the dog a smile the way people offer prayers when they don't know what else to do. Warden accepted it with a blink as if to say, "Yes, yes, the world is still here. I'm still on duty." Then Warden's body changed. It was subtle at first, ears snapping forward, muscles tightening under thick fur, the set of his shoulders shifting like a door locking. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply became still in a way that made Ryan's spine react before his mind did. Ryan paused mid-bite. He'd learned to trust that stillness the way sailors trust the tilt of a deck. "What is it?" he murmured, barely moving his lips. Warden didn't look at him, the dog's amber eyes fixed on the entrance, unblinking. The door opened. Cold air rushed in, bright as a slap, and with it stepped a woman who looked like she'd been arguing with winter her whole life and had never once let it win. She was in her early 50s, short to average height with a compact, wiry build, the kind of strength that comes from carrying boxes and burdens without complaining. Her county-issued winter jacket was zipped to her chin, a knit cap pressed down on hair that had once been blonde and was now threaded with gray, pulled into a low, practical bun that refused to be elegant. Her cheeks were red from cold. Her skin was fair with the faint roughness of a person who spent more time outdoors than she preferred. She held a sealed envelope like it might bite her if she loosened her grip. Her eyes, hazel, sharp, and not unkind, swept the room with purpose that kept tripping over hesitation. A woman with a job to do and a heart that didn't love what the job meant. She cleared her throat, voice carrying that practiced blend of authority and apology. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for Ryan Walker." Ryan's stomach tightened, a reflex older than reason. Official voices had a way of dragging ghosts behind them. Letters, notices, debts, forms, the heavy civilian chains that could feel harder than a rucksack. He raised a hand slightly. "That's me." The woman approached, boots squeaking on the wet floor. She stopped at a polite distance, the kind that respected dogs and men who looked like they'd been burned by the world. "My name is Sarah Mallory," she said, and in her tone you could hear the fatigue of someone who had spent years delivering news people didn't want. "County Probate Office." Warden rose smoothly and stepped half a pace in front of Ryan, not aggressive, just protective, evaluating Sarah the way a lock evaluates a key. Sarah noticed, swallowed, and gave the dog a brief nod as if acknowledging a fellow worker. Ryan almost smiled. Warden had that effect on people. He made them honest without meaning to. "He won't bite," Ryan said quietly, "unless you give him a reason." Sarah's mouth twitched, not quite humor, not quite relief. "I'll do my best to stay reason-free," she extended the envelope. "I've been trying to find you for weeks, Mr. Walker." "Most people aren't," Ryan replied, voice flat. There was a dry edge to it, the small humor of a man who had learned to laugh without opening his mouth too wide. Sarah inhaled, and for a second her professionalism softened into something almost human. "This is regarding your grandmother," she said. "Edith Keating." The name landed in Ryan like a stone dropped into deep water, not because it was painful, because it was unexpected. A memory surfaced. A small hand on his shoulder when he was a kid, the smell of pine needles and wool blankets, a humming voice that told stories as if rivers could remember faces. He hadn't seen Edith in years. He'd left home young, left again for the teams, and somewhere along the way, the distance had become permanent. Life does that. Doesn't always break things loudly. Sometimes it just quietly stops returning your calls. "She passed away," Sarah said, voice lowered with respect. "The estate is not large in the usual sense, but you are the last living heir." She hesitated, then added, "There is a property." Ryan blinked. "Property?" Sarah nodded, as if she'd asked herself the same question. "A house at Coldwater Ridge. It's noted as partially embedded in natural rock, cliffside construction." She glanced down at her paperwork. "There's also a warning on file. Older infrastructure beneath the stone cavity." Her eyes lifted to him again. "And the county has waived taxes temporarily until reassessment." The words didn't fit together in Ryan's head. Edith had lived simply. She wasn't wealthy. She'd been stubborn, yes, stubborn as winter. But rich? No. A cliffside house sounded like something from a legend, not a probate folder. Ryan took the envelope. The paper was cold. Warden leaned in and touched Ryan's sleeve with his nose, gentle as a nudge from fate. Inside were documents, a deed on yellowing paper, coordinates typed neatly, a rough sketch of property lines, and one handwritten note in an old slanted script that made Ryan's throat tighten because he could almost hear it spoken. Blue thread. For the listener. At the margin, a small blue ink symbol had been drawn. Simple, almost childlike, and yet deliberate. The ink looked fresh in a way ink should not after decades, or maybe it was only the brightness of winter playing tricks. Warden's body stiffened. He pressed his nose to the paper and with unnerving precision touched the blue symbol. A low sound rolled from his chest, soft, controlled, not a threat. It sounded almost reverent, like a hymn hummed under breath. The room seemed to quiet around them, as if everyone in the kitchen sensed, without understanding, that something ancient had just woken up and stretched. Ryan's skin prickled. Not from cold. From recognition he couldn't explain. Sarah kept speaking, unaware of the invisible shift. "It's remote," she said. "Hard to reach in winter, but it's yours." Ryan stared at the coordinates. The numbers felt like gravity. Somewhere behind them, mountains waited in bright white silence. He heard Edith's voice in memory, soft, patient, oddly amused, telling him that some things can only be heard when you finally stop running. "I haven't been up there since I was a kid," he murmured. Sarah's expression gentled. "Sometimes the places we leave don't stop being ours," she said. And then she looked at Ryan's uniform, the unbroken camouflage, the dog standing guard like a sentry of love. "If you decide to go, be careful." Ryan almost laughed, one sharp breath, humor with teeth. "Careful is kind of his job," he said, nodding at Warden. Warden blinked once, as if accepting the compliment without letting it go to his head. Sarah gave a small, awkward smile, then stepped back. "There are keys inside the packet, and my number, if you have questions." She paused, then added softly, "I'm sorry for your loss." Ryan didn't know how to answer that. Loss had become a language he spoke fluently but never enjoyed. He nodded once, and Sarah left, boots squeaking away, the cold air following her out like a curtain closing. Ryan finished his toast without tasting it. Outside, Spokane's winter light seemed even brighter, almost too bright, as if the world had turned up its exposure to make sure he couldn't hide. He and Warden stepped out into the street. Snow glittered. The sky was pale blue, crisp, unforgiving. Ryan adjusted the straps of his worn pack, checked the old watch on his wrist, cracked face still ticking stubbornly, and looked toward the distant outline of mountains beyond the city's edge. Warden looked too, ears forward, the dark overlay along his neck making him look like a wolf wearing a soldier's discipline. The dog's breath rose in warm plumes and vanished, like signals to gods who only answered in silence. "All right," Ryan said quietly, not to the city, not to the snow, but to the part of himself that still believed he didn't deserve a home. "Let's see what she left us." Warden gave one short bark, decisive, approving. That afternoon, they rode a bus to the last stop where plowed roads surrendered to forest. The driver barely glanced at Ryan's uniform, and the dog just nodded with the tired neutrality of winter workers. Ryan walked into the brightness of the trail, the snow crunching under his boots, the spruce trees standing like dark cathedral pillars. The climb wasn't steep yet, but it was steady. Warden trotted beside him with deliberate steps, head low, ears swiveling. The dog wasn't pulling. He was guiding, the way a loyal guardian guides a weary king who's forgotten his own map. As the sun lowered, the snow took on a faint blue tint, and the mountains ahead shone like silver teeth against the horizon. When they finally stopped to rest near a break in the trees, Ryan turned and looked back toward Spokane, now distant and small. For the first time in a long time, he felt something other than numbness, a thin, dangerous thread of purpose. Warden sat beside him, gaze fixed up the mountain road. And then Ryan saw it. Far above, moving slowly along the ridgeline, a black truck crawling through the snow like a beetle against white glass. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't lost. It was deliberate. Its headlights were on for a moment, two pale eyes. Then, As if sensing he was being watched, the lights clicked off. The truck kept moving in darkness. Ryan's chest tightened. Warden's hackles lifted slightly along his black overlay spine, and the dog let out a low, controlled growl that vibrated through the cold air like a warning carved into stone. Ryan didn't look away until the truck vanished behind the trees, leaving only the bright snow and the silent mountains pretending they had seen nothing at all. The trail narrowed as Ryan Walker climbed higher, Spokane falling away behind him until the city became nothing more than a pale memory caught between trees. Snow lay thick but clean, unbroken except for the faint line of his own boots and the lighter, deliberate prints of the German shepherd pacing just ahead. The daylight remained cruelly bright, winter sun reflecting off every drift until the world looked sharpened, as if carved from ice and glass. Breath came out of Ryan in steady clouds, each one measured, controlled. He had learned long ago that wasting air was a luxury. The house revealed itself gradually, not all at once. First, the edge of a cedar wall appeared through the trees, weathered to a soft gray-brown, boards warped by decades of wind and freeze. Then more of it emerged, until Ryan stopped without realizing he had done so. The structure sat against the mountain as if pressed there by a careful, patient hand. The front was timber, old cedar planks fitted with care rather than speed, while the back wall was not a wall at all, but bare basalt, dark and smooth, rising straight from the earth and swallowing half the building whole. Snow clung to the roof in uneven drifts, sparkling under the sun, while thin seams of steel reinforcement traced deliberate lines along the stone, bolted in place with a craftsman's stubbornness. Warden halted beside him, tail level, ears forward. The dog's dark sable coat looked almost black where shadow pooled along his neck and spine, the heavy overlay catching bits of light like ink absorbing snow glare. He didn't bark. He didn't pull. He simply stood there, breathing in slow, measured pulls, amber eyes locked on the house with a focus that made Ryan's skin tighten. "So this is it," Ryan murmured, though the wind stole most of the sound. The approach felt strange. The air changed as they stepped closer, not warmer, not colder, but heavier, carrying a faint mineral scent that reminded Ryan of underground training sites and sealed chambers where sound behaved differently. The door faced east, its surface scarred by time, iron hinges dulled but solid. Ryan unlocked it with the key from Sarah's envelope. The metal turned with a reluctant groan, like a joint waking after years of stillness. Inside, the cold was clean. Not the stale cold of abandonment, but a preserved chill, as if the house had been holding its breath. The smell was cedar and dust, with an undercurrent of stone and something faintly metallic. Light spilled in through narrow windows cut precisely into the walls, illuminating a single main room that felt more intentional than comfortable. A wood stove stood at the center, squat and iron-heavy, surrounded by neatly stacked logs that had long ago surrendered their scent. Folded quilts lay on a bench, thick and hand-stitched, their patterns faded but careful. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of dried herbs, labeled in an old, steady hand. A narrow desk was built directly into the stone, its surface cleared of clutter as if waiting. Ryan set his pack down slowly. He had been in places far more hostile than this, but the quiet here pressed differently. It felt observed. "Home," he said, not as a claim, but as a test. Warden stepped inside, paws silent on the wood, nose lifting. His posture shifted again, less alert now, more evaluative, like a professional inspecting a site. He moved to the stove and sniffed, then glanced back at Ryan with an expression that would have been comic if it weren't so exacting. Ryan crouched, pulled a match from his pocket, and reached toward the stove. The air was cold enough that lighting it felt automatic, muscle memory from too many nights where warmth meant survival. He struck the match. Warden acted instantly. The dog lunged forward just enough to knock Ryan's hand aside. The match flew, hissing as it died against the stone. Ryan froze. Then he exhaled a sharp, humorless breath. "You serious?" Warden sat down, square and unmoved, head tilted just slightly. The look he gave Ryan was unimpressed in a way that would have made any commanding officer reconsider their choices. Ryan frowned, then leaned closer to the stove. He opened the back vent. A puff of thick blackened soot drifted out, followed by a cough he couldn't suppress. The chimney was clogged nearly solid, years of neglect packed tight. If he had lit the fire, smoke would have filled the room in minutes. Ryan scratched behind Warden's ear, fingers sinking into dense fur. "Guess one of us still has working instincts," he muttered. Warden accepted the praise with dignity, tail sweeping once across the dusty floor. As Ryan moved through the room, taking inventory, he noticed how nothing felt random. Every object sat where it could be reached easily. The compass on the shelf bore scratches from heavy use. A tin of river stones was labeled by year. Even the chair by the desk faced the window at an exact angle, as if someone had spent hours sitting there, listening rather than looking. Then Warden stopped again. The dog moved toward the center of the floor, head low, nose skimming the planks. His body tightened, muscles bunching beneath his coat. He pawed once, lightly, then again more firmly. Ryan stepped closer. "What do you hear?" Warden pressed his nose to a narrow seam between boards. 3 short, sharp scratches followed, precise and controlled. The floor vibrated, just enough that Ryan felt it through the soles of his boots. A metallic sound answered from below, a soft, unmistakable click. Ryan knelt, heart picking up pace despite himself. He ran his fingers along the seam. The board wasn't loose. It was fitted, too well. His hand brushed against a small circular indent, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it, or unless you were a German shepherd with ears tuned to the earth. He pressed. The latch shifted. A recessed handle rose smoothly from the floor. Ryan sat back on his heels, staring. "You built a damn vault," he whispered, half in disbelief, half in something like awe. He lifted the panel carefully. Beneath it, a square opening yawned open into darkness. A rope ladder descended, its rungs worn smooth by hands and boots that had climbed it many times. Cold air breathed upward, carrying the scent of damp stone, minerals, and old iron. The smell tugged at Ryan's memory. Underground reservoirs, sealed spaces, places where sound traveled farther than light. Warden leaned in, nostrils flaring. He didn't descend. Instead, he sat back on his haunches, tail curling neatly around his paws, posture calm but expectant, waiting. "Not yet," Ryan said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. "Let's understand the house first." He replaced the panel and stood, though the image of the dark passage stayed with him like an afterimage burned onto the eye. He spent the next hour clearing snow tracked in from the doorway, dusting shelves, opening drawers. Everywhere, Edith's presence felt deliberate. She hadn't been hiding. She'd been preparing. Late afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning the snow outside into a field of blinding white. Ryan moved to the desk and opened a single drawer. Inside lay a notebook, its leather cover cracked at the edges, corners softened by years of handling. Embossed on the front were words that tightened his chest. For the listener. He didn't open it yet. Some things demanded patience. As the sun dipped lower, Ryan stepped outside to take in the perimeter. The cold bit sharper now, shadows stretching long across the snow. That was when he saw it. Near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of the house's shadow, were tire tracks. Fresh, deep. The tread was wide, industrial, not the narrow pattern of local trucks or plows. The tracks hadn't been there when he arrived. He was sure of it. Ryan straightened slowly. His eyes followed the tracks until they vanished back toward the ridge road. Warden came up beside him, hackles lifting just enough to ripple the black overlay along his spine. A low sound rolled from his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but one meant to warn. Ryan looked from the tracks to the darkening trees. The daylight was fading, but the snow still reflected enough light to make hiding difficult. Whoever had driven up here hadn't stayed long. Long enough to look. Long enough to confirm. Ryan rested a hand on Warden's neck, feeling the steady strength beneath the fur. "We're not alone," he said softly. The mountain answered with silence. But beneath that silence, Ryan could feel it now, a faint vibration underfoot, subtle and steady, like something deep within the stone shifting its weight. As night settled over the ridge, the house pressed closer against the mountain, timber and basalt locked together like a secret refusing to be pried loose. And somewhere below the floorboards, beyond the hidden hatch, the cold breath of the earth waited, patient as memory. Morning arrived sharp and merciless, the kind of winter light that stripped shadows of mercy. Snow around the cliffside house glowed white-blue under the sun, every crystal reflecting clarity rather than warmth. Ryan woke fully clothed on the bench near the stove, one hand still resting on his pack out of habit, the other brushing against thick fur. Warden lay at his feet, body aligned with the door, head lifted the moment Ryan stirred. The dog's amber eyes were already awake, already working, tracking the subtle language of sound and vibration that never quite slept. Ryan rose slowly, joints stiff, breath fogging the air. The house creaked once, not from wind, but from the mountains settling behind it, stone adjusting its ancient weight. He poured water from his canteen, drank, then looked again at the floor where the hidden panel lay flush and innocent, as if it had never betrayed its secret. "Daylight," Ryan said quietly. "Now we listen." He knelt and lifted the panel. Cold air breathed upward again, sharper now, edged with damp mineral scent and something else, old machinery, iron long resigned to rust. Ryan tested the rope ladder, tugging twice, then began the descent. His boots found each rung with controlled precision, muscle memory from years of vertical insertions and confined drops. Warden waited until Ryan reached the bottom, then followed without hesitation, front paws gripping, hind legs sliding in disciplined rhythm. The dog landed silently beside him, shook once, and pressed close to Ryan's leg as if confirming the perimeter. The chamber was smaller than Ryan expected, no larger than a modest bedroom, carved directly from basalt. The stone walls curved naturally, then were reinforced with timber beams darkened by age and careful use. A single lantern glowed faintly on the far wall, its light steady and clean. Solar-fed, Ryan realized, old but maintained. Someone had been down here often, recently at least in spirit. At the center stood the device that pulled Ryan forward despite himself. A hydrophone, unmistakable in its adapted form, rested on a metal worktable bolted to the floor. Its casing was scratched and patched, wires bound with careful tape rather than haste. Beside it lay a pair of padded headphones, the kind used for long monitoring sessions, and a coil of handwritten notes tied together with twine. Maps covered the stone wall behind the table, each one traced with looping blue lines that branched and rejoined like veins beneath skin. In the corner of each map, written in the same deliberate hand, were two words: blue thread. Ryan exhaled slowly. "You weren't imagining things," he murmured, speaking to a woman long gone but suddenly very present. He lifted the headphones, feeling their worn weight, then hesitated. Years ago there had been a night when listening too long had cost lives. Sound had arrived late, or maybe he had. Since then, part of him distrusted what couldn't be seen. Warden nudged his knee, firm but gentle, eyes steady. "All right," Ryan said. He put the headphones on and powered the unit. Static whispered first, thin and harmless. Then something rose beneath it, low, rhythmic, a pulse so steady it felt biological rather than mechanical. Ryan adjusted the dial, breath slowing as the sound sharpened. It wasn't water rushing or dripping. It was deeper, rounder, like pressure moving through hollow stone. A heartbeat, if mountains had hearts. Then, cutting through it, came a different vibration. Intermittent, metallic, a grind that didn't belong. The pulse wavered when it passed, as if flinching. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had trained long enough with demolitions and heavy equipment to know when sound carried weight. "That's not natural," he said aloud. He pulled one of the notebooks free. Edith's handwriting filled the pages, looping but precise, the script of someone patient enough to wait for truth. Entries were dated across decades, pressure stable, harmonic resonance intact. Then, years later, a change. Pressure dip at night, anomalous vibration coinciding with vehicle mass, repeated mention of tanker traffic. And then a name that made Ryan still. Clear Vast Water. He'd never heard of them, but the tone in Edith's notes shifted whenever the name appeared. Less wonder, more warning. Blue thread weakens when heavy transport passes ridgeline. Not water loss, pressure loss. Water remembers. Ryan closed the notebook slowly. He reached up and lifted the headphones off. Warden had gone rigid, ears rotating in tight arcs, body angled toward the ladder. The dog's focus sharpened, muscles locked in that unmistakable pre-alert posture Ryan had learned to trust without question. "What is it?" Ryan whispered. Warden answered with 3 sharp barks, evenly spaced, the signal he used only when something crossed from distant to imminent. From above, through layers of stone and timber, a sound drifted down, faint but distinct. The crunch of tires on snow, slow, heavy, then silence. Ryan felt the hair along his arms rise. The chamber seemed to tighten, stone holding its breath. He shut down the hydrophone and removed the headphones, the sudden quiet almost louder than the sound had been. He looked up the ladder. The square of daylight above was no longer whole. Something blocked part of it, casting a moving shadow across the opening. Ryan's pulse steadied instead of spiking. Training took over. He placed one hand on Warden's neck, grounding both of them. "Stay," he breathed. Warden didn't move, eyes locked upward, chest barely rising. The shadow shifted again. A boot scraped wood. Whoever stood above wasn't careless, but they weren't as silent as they thought. Weight distribution off, not military, likely civilian used to machines rather than movement. Ryan reached for the metal measuring pole resting against the wall, 4 feet of solid weight, not a weapon, but enough. He climbed the ladder slowly, keeping his body close to the rungs, moving when the wind outside gusted to mask sound. At the top, he stopped just short of pushing the panel open. Warden's head appeared beside his knee, the dog having followed despite the command, choosing judgment over obedience. Ryan didn't correct him. Sometimes instincts outranked orders. Ryan lifted the panel an inch. Light spilled through the gap. No face hovered above, just the underside of the floor and the faint smell of oil and cold air. He pushed the panel fully open and rose. The house was empty, but the front door stood ajar, just slightly, enough to let a blade of cold cut across the floor. Ryan crossed the room in silence, Warden flowing beside him like a shadow made of muscle and fur. Outside, the snow lay bright and unmarred except for one new set of prints leading away from the house toward the ridge road. Heavy tread. Industrial. The same as the tracks he'd seen the night before. Ryan followed them with his eyes until they vanished into glare and distance. Whoever it was hadn't broken in. They hadn't taken anything. They'd listened, or tried to. Ryan closed the door and leaned his forehead briefly against the wood. "You found something worth hiding," he said, voice low. Warden sat beside him, tail still, ears up, a living perimeter. Ryan returned to the desk and opened the notebook again, this time reading faster, piecing together intent. Edith hadn't been cataloging water. She'd been listening to pressure, to sound traveling through stone. The blue thread wasn't just a vein, it was a system, and someone was interfering with it deliberately enough to change its song. As the sun climbed higher, light flooding the room until every dust mote glittered, Ryan made a decision he hadn't planned to make. He packed the notebooks, photographed the maps, and carefully shut the hatch. He would go into Spokane. He would find out who Clearvast was, and why a company would send someone up a mountain to stand silently over a dead woman's listening room. He clipped the leash onto Warden's collar, not because the dog needed it, but because the world did, and opened the door. Before stepping out, Ryan paused and looked back at the hidden floor panel, at the quiet house pressed into stone. The mountain hummed faintly beneath his boots, a sensation more felt than heard, like a living thing waiting to be understood. "We'll come back," he said. Warden glanced once at the floor, then at Ryan, as if agreeing. They stepped into the blinding snow, unaware that somewhere up the ridge, unseen eyes were already adjusting their plans. Spokane welcomed Ryan back with the same unforgiving brightness, winter sunlight pouring through cloudless sky and bouncing off snowbanks until the streets looked scrubbed raw. The city felt louder after the mountain, not in sound, but in movement. Cars hissed over salted roads, boots scraped ice from sidewalks, and people hurried with their heads down, as if speed itself might keep the cold from noticing them. Ryan walked with Warden at his side, the leash loose, the dog's dark sable coat stark against the white glare. The German shepherd moved with quiet confidence, 6 years of disciplined awareness evident in every step, ears rotating as the city spoke in 100 overlapping languages of threat and routine. They went first to the Spokane Public Library, a squat brick building with tall windows that caught the winter sun and threw it deep into the interior. Inside, warmth spread gently, the air carrying the smell of old paper and dust warmed by decades of patient light. Rows of shelves stood like sentinels, their spines faded but proud. At the central desk sat a woman who looked as though she had been carved from the same patience as the building itself. Linda Parker was in her early 60s, tall and straight-backed, with silver hair pulled into a neat twist that refused to fray even in winter dryness. Her skin was pale, with a faint network of lines earned from years of squinting at fine print and dealing with people who mistook quiet for weakness. Wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose, and her eyes, sharp gray, alert, lifted the moment Ryan approached. She took in his uniform, the unbroken digital camouflage, the disciplined posture, and then the dog, whose gaze met hers calmly, without challenge. "Well, Linda said, voice warm but direct. You must be Edith Keating's grandson. Ryan blinked. That obvious? Linda smiled faintly, the expression of someone who had been waiting longer than she cared to admit. Your grandmother spent half her life in our archives, she said. She always said someone would come looking eventually. I just didn't know if I'd still be here to see it. Warden sat at Ryan's side, tail curled neatly around his paws, posture impeccable. Linda glanced down at him and nodded once, as if acknowledging a colleague. And you brought backup, she added. He listens better than most people, Ryan replied. Linda gestured toward a side hallway. If you're here about the ridge, you'll want the archives room. She rose with practiced ease, moving with the efficiency of someone who had learned to conserve motion. As they walked, she spoke without turning back. Your grandmother filed reports, letters, notes, the kind that don't make headlines but don't disappear either. Some people call that persistence. Others call it trouble. The archives room smelled of ink and dust, quieter than the rest of the library. At a wide table stood a man bent over a map, his long frame slightly stooped, as if years of fieldwork had taught his spine to bow to the earth rather than fight it. He straightened when Linda cleared her throat. Dr. Owen Mercer looked to be in his late 60s, tall and lean, with shoulders that had once been broad and were now sharpened by age rather than diminished. His hair was a wild spill of white curls, untamed and unapologetic, and a narrow mustache cut a sharp line above lips that rarely smiled. His skin was weathered, tanned unevenly from decades outdoors, and his eyes, hazel, deep-set, held a permanent tension between suspicion and curiosity. He wore a wool sweater under a worn jacket, the cuffs frayed, the pockets heavy with habit. A man who trusted data more than people, but who still showed up when the numbers told him to. If you're not returning a book, Mercer said without preamble, I don't have time for idle conversation. Ryan stepped forward. I found something on Coldwater Ridge, he said. My grandmother's house, a listening chamber under it. Mercer stilled, not softened, not surprised, just still. He lifted his gaze fully to Ryan, eyes narrowing. Edith Keating, he said slowly. That woman heard things the county refused to. Ryan laid the notebook on the table and opened it. He didn't need to explain much. Mercer's eyes tracked the handwriting, the dates, the diagrams. As he read, something hardened in his expression, not anger, but recognition. He pulled a pair of reading glasses from his pocket and perched them on his nose, scanning faster now. These pressure signatures, Mercer muttered, tapping a page with a long finger. They're not natural fluctuations. This is mechanical interference, industrial scale. Linda crossed her arms, leaning against a shelf. She tried to tell the council, she said quietly. 15 years ago, they said she was chasing ghosts. Mercer snorted. They say that whenever listening requires inconvenience. Ryan described the hydrophone, the rhythmic pulse, the metallic interruption. Mercer closed his eyes briefly, as if aligning memory with math. If they're pumping deep enough to disrupt pressure without immediately draining volume, he said, they could collapse the vein from the inside. The blue thread, if that's her term, would fail silently. Wells would dry months later. People would blame drought or winter. Linda's mouth tightened, and no one would connect it back. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a thin box of files. These never made it past preliminary review, she said, setting them down. Meeting notes, complaints, Edith's correspondence. They were shelved. Ryan flipped through them, jaw tightening. Dates matched, locations matched. The town hadn't been ignorant. It had been tired. When Ryan left the library, the winter sun was already sinking, turning the snow into a field of blinding white again. He walked back toward the motel with Warden pacing close, the dog's awareness sharpened now by the city's noise. Halfway there, Ryan's phone buzzed. Unknown number. One line of text glowed on the screen. Don't dig. Winter is long. Ryan stopped walking. Warden stopped with him, body angling subtly between Ryan and the street. Ryan stared at the message until the screen dimmed. He didn't reply. Night fell clean and fast. The motel sat on the edge of downtown, low and forgettable, its neon sign flickering weakly against the snow. Ryan parked, scanned the lot, then stepped out with Warden. The dog's ears pricked immediately. A man stood near Ryan's door. He was in his mid-40s, average height, with a lean build wrapped in a charcoal overcoat that looked too polished for Spokane winter. His hair was brown, neatly parted, untouched by snow, and his face was clean-shaven, the jawline sharp but softened by a practiced smile. His skin carried the faint pallor of someone who spent more time under fluorescent lights than sun. He stood with his hands visible, posture relaxed, as if he'd rehearsed this meeting. "Ryan Walker," the man said, voice smooth, measured. "I work with Clear Vast Water Holdings." Warden's gaze locked onto him, amber eyes unblinking. The dog did not growl. He simply watched, cataloging. The man noticed, his smile thinned by a fraction. "Beautiful animal," he said. "You don't see discipline like that often." "He's not for sale," Ryan replied. The man chuckled softly, unfazed. "Daniel Carter," he said, offering his name but not his hand. "We like to help people new to the ridge. Winters can be unforgiving." Ryan didn't move. "I don't remember asking for help." Carter's eyes flicked briefly to the uniform, then back to Ryan's face. "We all benefit when curiosity stays within reasonable boundaries," he said gently. "Remote properties can be dangerous. Accidents happen." Warden took one step forward. Carter noticed. His shoulders tightened, just enough. "Offer declined," Ryan said. Carter nodded, backing away with the same calm he'd arrived with. "If you change your mind," he said, sliding a card onto the hood of Ryan's car, "you know where to find us." He walked off into the snow without looking back. Ryan exhaled slowly, breath fogging. Trouble wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The motel room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet, the kind of neutral sterility meant to convince people that nothing bad ever lingered. Ryan didn't sleep much. He lay on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, boots aligned beneath the small table, jacket folded within reach. Warden rested on the floor beside him, head on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert, breathing slow and even. The dog's presence was the only thing that allowed Ryan to close his eyes at all. When morning came, it arrived thin and gray, light slipping through the curtains like a cautious visitor. Ryan checked his phone once. No new messages. The silence felt deliberate. By mid-morning, Daniel Carter returned. Ryan spotted him first through the motel window, the same charcoal coat, the same controlled stride that suggested confidence polished by repetition. Carter didn't hurry. He never did. That, Ryan realized, was part of the tactic. Appear reasonable, appear patient, make the other person feel like the one escalating things. Carter stopped a few steps away, hands visible, posture relaxed. He looked exactly as he had the night before, mid-40s, clean-shaven, neatly parted brown hair untouched by the cold, skin pale and unlined in a way that spoke of office lighting rather than winter sun. His eyes were light, blue-gray, calculating, and they missed very little. "Good morning," Carter said, voice warm enough to pass for friendly. "I was hoping we could talk without misunderstandings." Ryan stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Warden followed and sat immediately at Ryan's left heel, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. The German Shepherd's dark sable coat absorbed the morning light, black overlay along his neck making him look carved from shadow. He didn't stare aggressively. He simply watched Carter with unblinking precision, the way locks watch keys. "I said no," Ryan replied. Carter smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting just slightly. "I heard you," he said. "But winter changes people's minds. It's long, it's expensive, and the ridge is remote." He gestured vaguely toward the mountains. "Clearvast has programs, seasonal assistance, fuel vouchers, road access. All we ask is that you don't wander into active corporate zones for your own safety." Warden's eyes never left Carter's face. Ryan folded his arms. "You mean don't ask questions?" Carter chuckled softly, as if amused by Ryan's bluntness. "Curiosity is admirable," he said, "but it can also be dangerous. Accidents happen up there. Storms, equipment, wildlife." He glanced at Warden. "Even well-trained animals can't account for everything." That did it. Warden leaned forward a fraction, muscles tightening under thick fur. His gaze sharpened, pupils narrowing. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply became immovable, like a door that would not open no matter how politely you knocked. Ryan felt the familiar shift inside his chest, the click of a boundary being set. "Offer declined," he said again, voice flat. You should leave. Carter studied Ryan for a long second, eyes flicking to the uniform, the unbroken digital camouflage, the posture that hadn't softened despite years away from command. Something calculated recalibrated behind his eyes. He reached into his coat and placed a business card on the hood of Ryan's car. "If you reconsider," Carter said, backing away slowly, "my number's there." "And Ryan," he paused, smile thinning into something colder. "Living alone on a mountain? It's not safe." He turned and walked away, footsteps crisp against the frozen pavement. Ryan didn't watch him go. He watched Warden instead, hand resting briefly on the dog's neck, grounding himself in the warmth beneath the fur. They left Spokane an hour later. The drive back toward the ridge felt longer than before, the road narrowing as plows gave way to packed snow and silence. Daylight sharpened again as the trees closed in, snow reflecting so brightly it hurt to look at. Ryan parked where the road ended and continued on foot, pack heavier now with notebooks and copies of maps. Warden ranged ahead, nose low, tail level, reading the forest like a living map. The house appeared just as before, cedar front weathered and patient, basalt back rising dark and solid from the earth. But something felt wrong the moment Ryan stepped into the clearing. Warden stopped short, head snapping up, nostrils flaring. His body language shifted from alert to alarmed. "What is it?" Ryan whispered. Warden didn't answer with sound. He turned and ran for the porch. Ryan followed, heart pounding harder than he wanted to admit. The front door was closed, but as he reached for the handle, he saw it. Fresh scratches around the lock. Not deep enough to break it, deep enough to test it. The metal bore thin, jagged lines that hadn't been there before, catching the light like a warning written in steel. Ryan crouched, fingers brushing the marks, too large to be a knife, too deliberate to be an accident. He stepped back and scanned the snow. Near the edge of the porch, partially scuffed by wind, were boot prints, larger than his. He wore a size 11. These were at least a 13. The tread was industrial, matching the tracks he'd seen before. Whoever had been here hadn't tried to hide. They'd wanted him to know. Warden stood at the edge of the porch, body angled outward, head high, ears forward. He sniffed the air, then let out a low, sustained growl that vibrated through the cold. Ryan followed the dog's gaze toward the tree line. There, far enough to be almost imagined, a flicker of light, headlights. They blinked on for half a second, then off again, like an eye opening and closing. The vehicle remained hidden behind trees, engine sound swallowed by distance and snow. Ryan's breath came slow and controlled. Fear wasn't useful, assessment was. He guided Warden inside and locked the door, then moved methodically through the house, checking windows, corners, the floor panel. Nothing disturbed inside. The listening chamber remained sealed. Whoever had come hadn't broken in. They had tested the perimeter. Measured his response time. Night fell quickly, the mountains swallowing the last of the light. Ryan didn't light the stove. Smoke would travel. Instead, he layered quilts and sat with his back to the basalt wall, the stone cold but solid. Warden positioned himself near the door, head up, body still, a living alarm system. Hours passed. The forest spoke in small sounds, wind through branches, distant ice shifting, snow slipping from limbs. Ryan stayed awake, mind turning over Mercer's words, Linda's files, Carter's warning. Clear Vast wasn't just interested, they were watching, and watching meant pressure. Just after midnight, Warden's ears snapped forward. His body stiffened. Ryan was on his feet in an instant. From somewhere down the ridge came the faint crunch of tires on snow, slow, careful, then stopped. Ryan moved to the window, careful not to silhouette himself. The snow outside glowed faintly under moonlight. No vehicle visible, just darkness and trees. Warden let out a single, quiet huff. Not a bark, not a growl, a signal. "They're still here," Ryan murmured. He thought of Carter's smile, of the words, "for your own safety," of Edith's notes warning that pressure failed at night. The pieces aligned into something cold and deliberate. Ryan rested his hand on Warden's head, fingers sinking into thick fur. "They want me scared," he said. "They want me gone." Warden leaned into the touch, steady and unafraid. Ryan looked toward the floor where the hidden hatch lay, then up at the door, then out into the night where unseen eyes waited. He didn't know yet how he would fight this, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't leaving. Outside, the headlights did not return, but the silence they left behind was heavier than noise. The old municipal building in Spokane had been standing long enough to learn the weight of secrets. Its stone facade caught the winter sun and threw it back in blinding sheets, snow outside reflecting so brightly it felt as though the world itself were holding a mirror to the truth. Inside, tall glass windows funneled pale light into a long chamber lined with worn wooden benches and portraits of former commissioners whose eyes seemed to follow every movement. The air smelled of dust, paper, and the faint metallic tang of old pipes hidden behind the walls. Ryan Walker stood near the front with Warden at his feet, the dog lying still in perfect working posture. Ryan wore his Navy working uniform as he always did now, digital camouflage unbroken, sleeves neat, boots clean but scarred from use. He stood straight, shoulders squared, jaw set. The uniform was not a performance, it was armor. Across the room, people murmured. Locals bundled in coats, farmers with weather-cracked hands, retirees clutching folders, all drawn here by rumors they'd felt in their wells long before they heard them in words. Dr. Owen Mercer stood beside Ryan, taller than most despite his age, white curls untamed, wool jacket hanging open as if he'd forgotten it entirely. His face bore the etched seriousness of a man who had spent decades watching small warnings turn into large disasters. He held a thick folder of charts and diagrams against his chest, fingers gripping it, not out of nerves, but out of restraint. Linda Parker sat just behind them, spine straight, silver hair immaculate, a stack of archival files balanced on her lap. Her expression was calm but resolute, the look of someone who had kept records long enough to know when history was about to be rewritten. Across the aisle sat the representatives of Clearvast Water Holdings. Their clothes were darker, sharper, untouched by snow. At the center was their attorney, Arthur Hale, a man in his late 40s with a narrow, angular face and skin the color of parchment. His hair was slicked back precisely, not a strand out of place, and his eyes were a cold gray that suggested calculation rather than malice. He had the posture of someone accustomed to winning by wearing others down. Beside him, two company men sat stiffly, hands folded, eyes darting when they thought no one noticed. The commissioner opened the session with a practiced clearing of the throat. We're here to consider concerns regarding groundwater stability along Coldwater Ridge and allegations of industrial interference. Mr. Walker, you may begin. Ryan stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke steadily, laying out what he had found: the listening chamber, the hydrophone, the pressure anomalies. He read directly from Edith Keating's notebook, letting her handwriting speak through him. As he did, the room grew quieter, the kind of silence that wasn't empty but attentive. Mercer followed, spreading charts across the table. These are harmonic pressure signatures, he explained, tapping the paper with a long finger. They indicate sustained mechanical pumping at depth, not water withdrawal alone, pressure diversion. If this continues, the vein will fail internally. The damage won't announce itself. Wells will dry months later. The ridge will hollow from the inside. Arthur Hale rose smoothly when it was his turn. He adjusted his jacket and offered a thin smile to the commissioners. With respect, he said, voice polished and calm. Mrs. Keating was dedicated, but she struggled in her later years. Her notes reflect personal interpretations, not verified science. Seasonal fluctuations are common. Clearvast has complied with every regulation. These claims are, at best, imaginative. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Linda's jaw tightened. Mercer's nostrils flared. Ryan felt something old and familiar stir in his chest, the memory of being told danger wasn't real until it was too late. Then Warden stood. The movement was sudden enough to draw every eye. The German shepherd rose from his down position in one smooth motion, ears snapping forward, body rigid. Without barking, he trotted toward the side hallway that led to the building's maintenance and boiler rooms. Ryan smelled it a heartbeat later. Sweet, metallic, wrong, gas. Everyone out! Ryan shouted, the command cutting through the room with the authority of muscle memory. Now! The commissioner didn't hesitate. Chairs scraped back. People surged toward exits as staff flung open doors. Cold air rushed in, biting and clean. Warden scratched urgently at a utility door, whining now, chest heaving. Ryan yanked it open. The hiss was faint but unmistakable. A corroded gas line ran along the wall, split at a seam, leaking invisibly into the building. Years of neglect, not sabotage, but just as deadly. Mercer staggered back, coughing. Linda grabbed a nearby woman by the arm and pulled her toward the door. Within minutes, the chamber stood empty, snow swirling in through open exits as firefighters arrived. Outside, wrapped in coats and shock, the crowd clustered together. Someone murmured prayers. Someone else stared at Warden with wide eyes. "He smelled it," a woman whispered. "Before anyone else." Ryan knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to the dog's. "Good boy," he breathed. Warden leaned into him, tail low but steady. The crisis already catalogued and set aside. The building was declared unsafe until repairs could be made. The commissioner addressed the crowd from the steps, breath fogging in the cold. "Given the evidence presented today and the incident we just avoided," he said, "the county is ordering Clear Vast Water Holdings to suspend all pumping activity along Coldwater Ridge pending a full investigation." A gasp rippled through the people. Arthur Hale's composure cracked for the first time, just a flicker, but Ryan saw it. By late afternoon, the crowd dispersed. Ryan walked with Warden through streets still blazing with reflected snow. His phone buzzed again, but he didn't look. He didn't need to. As dusk settled, Ryan drove back toward the ridge. The road climbed, trees closing in, light fading. Then he saw it. Ahead, unmistakable against the snow-dark road, a black industrial truck climbed the mountain, no attempt to hide, headlights blazing, the Clear Vast logo stark on the side. Warden growled low. Ryan slowed but didn't turn back. He watched the truck continue upward, toward the house pressed into stone, toward secrets that no longer belonged to one woman alone. Whatever was coming next, Clear Vast wasn't retreating. The storm arrived without ceremony, as winter storms often did in the high country. The sky didn't darken so much as it erased itself, turning into a vast, blinding white that swallowed horizon and shadow alike. Snow fell sideways in dense sheets, driven by wind sharp enough to sting exposed skin like thrown grit. Yet even in the violence of it, the world remained strangely bright, light scattering through the storm so that visibility came and went in flashes, trees appearing, vanishing, then reappearing like ghosts learning how to walk. Ryan stood on the porch of the cliffside house, shoulders squared against the wind, navy working uniform already dusted white. The digital camouflage broke up his outline against stone and snow until he looked half-etched into the mountain itself. His jaw was set, stubble crusted with ice, eyes narrowed against the glare. Years ago, in another whiteout halfway across the world, a storm like this had taken a good man because someone had hesitated. Ryan did not hesitate anymore. He measured, he waited, he listened. Warden stood beside him, body low, tail rigid, ears pinned forward. The German shepherd's dark sable coat was nearly black where snow couldn't cling, his thick fur insulating him from the cold that bit into Ryan's cheeks. At 6 years old, Warden was in his prime, strong, disciplined, and guided by instincts honed through work rather than play. He lifted his head suddenly, nostrils flaring, then turned sharply toward the slope east of the house. He barked once, short, urgent. Ryan felt it then, not sound exactly, but absence, a gap in the storm's roar where something else struggled to be heard. He followed Warden without question, boots sinking deep as they moved off the porch and into the blinding white. The dog kept low, moving in bursts, stopping every few yards to listen, then correcting course. To Ryan, the slope looked uniform, dangerous. To Warden, it was a map written in pressure and scent. The wind tore at them as they descended along a narrow shelf of rock half buried in snow. Visibility dropped to a few yards, then returned in sudden, harsh clarity. And there it was. A truck lay twisted below the shelf, half buried by a collapsed bank of snow and ice. Its rear end was canted at an unnatural angle, wheels still spinning slowly in the air before finally shuddering to a stop. The Clear Vast logo was visible through frost and snow, stark and unmistakable. 3 figures crouched near the cab, their neon safety jackets dulled to sickly pastels by ice. One of them waved frantically when he saw Ryan. "Help!" the man shouted, his voice thin and ragged against the wind. "Please!" Ryan slid the last few feet down the slope, planting his boots wide. Warden immediately broke into motion, circling the scene, barking in sharp, rhythmic bursts. Not panic, but instruction. 1 bark, pause, 2 barks. He was setting a perimeter, marking safe footing where the snow was more stable. The 3 workers looked young, early 20s at most, faces pale and raw with cold. One clutched his shoulder, teeth chattering violently. Another stood frozen, eyes wide and unfocused. The third, the one who had shouted, was stocky, freckle-faced, with red hair tied into a short knot that had come loose under his hood. His breath came in panicked gasps. "The driver's trapped," he said, pointing toward the cab. "The snowslide crushed it. We can't get him out." Ryan moved to the cab, crouching low. Inside, slumped against the steering wheel, was a man in his late 30s with dark skin and close-cropped hair, blood streaked down from a cut on his forehead, already stiffening with ice. His eyes fluttered when Ryan tapped the window. "Hey," Ryan said firmly. "Stay with me." The man groaned softly. His breathing was shallow but steady. Shock was coming. Fast. "Warden," Ryan called. The dog appeared instantly at his side. "Hold!" Warden planted himself near the injured driver's door, body angled outward, ears tracking the slope above. Snow creaked ominously somewhere higher up. Another slide was possible. Ryan turned back to the workers. "Names," he said. "Now." The freckled one swallowed. "Dean," he said. That's Marcus and Eli." Marcus, the one clutching his shoulder, nodded weakly. Eli stared at the truck as if willing it to undo itself. "Why were you up here?" Ryan asked, already bracing himself against the bent metal. Dean hesitated, then blurted, "We were told to secure storage, lock down files, before the audit." His eyes flicked to the Clear Vast logo, then back to Ryan. "We didn't know about the storm. They said it was manageable." Ryan's jaw tightened. Of course they had. He wedged his shoulder beneath the twisted frame and pushed. Muscles screamed as metal groaned in protest. Snow shifted, threatening to give way. Warden barked twice, sharp and precise, warning Ryan just in time to adjust his footing. "Now!" Ryan shouted. "Pull!" Marcus and Dean hauled on the door as Ryan forced space inch by inch. The trapped driver cried out, then slumped as the pressure eased. Together they dragged him free, collapsing into the snow as the wind howled triumphantly around them. Warden circled immediately, nose pressed to the driver's chest, then barked once, short, approving. Alive. They formed a staggered line back toward the house, Ryan supporting the injured driver, Dean and Marcus helping Eli limp behind. Warden moved ahead and back, guiding them along the safest path, barking when someone drifted too close to unstable ground. The storm tried to erase them with every step, but the dog's certainty cut through it like a compass needle. By the time they reached the porch, all four men were shaking violently. Ryan ushered them inside, slamming the door against the wind. The house felt suddenly small, crowded with breath and fear and the sharp smell of wet wool. Ryan laid the driver near the wall, checking his pupils, pressing cloth against the wound. The man's eyes opened briefly. "You're the guy," he whispered hoarsely. "The one Clearvast said was causing trouble." Ryan met his gaze. "Not today," he said. "Today, you're just alive." Dean sat on the floor, hands buried in his hair, staring at Warden. "Didn't think anyone would help us," he said quietly. "After everything." Warden walked over and sat in front of him, calm and solid. Dean let out a shaky laugh that turned into something like a sob. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, the hydrophone clicked. Ryan froze. The sound came again, unmistakable, from below the floor. A rapid, uneven pulse, sharper than before, like a heartbeat pushed past its limits. Warden's head snapped toward the hidden hatch. His body stiffened, ears rotating, tail low. The dog let out a low, uneasy whine, not fear, but warning. Ryan felt it too now. The vibration underfoot had changed. It wasn't steady anymore. It surged, faltered, surged again. Dean noticed Ryan's expression. "What is that?" he asked. Ryan didn't answer. He stared at the floor, at the mountain pressing against the house, at the storm battering everything from above and the unseen pressure straining from below. The hydrophone pulsed faster, and for the first time since Edith's death, Ryan felt certain of one thing. Whatever Clearvast had been doing, the mountain was reaching its limit. Morning broke clean and bright after the storm, the kind of winter clarity that felt earned rather than given. Snow lay untouched across the ridge, smoothed into gentle curves that caught the sun and returned it tenfold. The air was so clear it seemed to ring when Ryan stepped onto the porch. He wore his Navy working uniform as he always had through this ordeal. Digital camouflage continuous across every inch. No solid panels, no breaks. Yet for the first time it felt less like armor and more like history he could finally set down without shame. Inside the house, The rescued men slept wrapped in quilts, breath steady, color slowly returning to their faces. Dean sat awake at the table, hands wrapped around a mug, eyes red but alert. In the full light of day, he looked younger than he had in the storm. Early 20s, freckled skin raw from wind, red hair now freed from its knot and sticking up in soft, uncertain angles. He carried the restless guilt of someone who had followed orders too long without asking why. When Ryan met his gaze, Dean nodded once, a silent promise already forming. Help came quickly after sunrise. County vehicles climbed the ridge, followed by state auditors and emergency crews. Dr. Owen Mercer arrived with them, coat dusted white, hair wilder than usual, eyes bright behind fogged glasses. Linda Parker followed soon after, wrapped in a thick wool scarf, posture upright despite the climb, her silver hair gleaming against the snow. Even Sarah Mallory came, short, compact, cheeks red from cold, county jacket zipped high, hazel eyes intent. She looked different up here, stripped of fluorescent lights and paperwork, more human, more resolved. The audit unfolded with a precision that left no room for excuses. Maps were spread across tables. Coordinates were checked, then checked again. Drilling logs emerged, some official, others never meant to leave locked cabinets. Mercer traced lines with a finger that trembled not from age but from restrained anger. These wells crossed the permitted boundary by 70 meters, he said. This angle here, directly into the most fragile section of the vein. Your grandmother marked it decades ago. Dean and the other workers spoke quietly at first, then more firmly as the truth loosened its grip on their fear. Orders had come down to secure storage, to lock records before auditors arrived, to treat the mountain like a vault rather than a living system. Their testimonies aligned with Edith's notes as if she had been writing answers to questions that wouldn't be asked until now. By the end of the second day, Clearvast's position collapsed. Pumps were ordered shut permanently on every unauthorized well. Funding was mandated for community well repairs and filtration systems. And in a move that felt both symbolic and overdue, the state designated the ridge as a protected conservation area, officially named the Edith Keating Water Vein Preserve. Linda pressed her lips together when she heard it, eyes shining behind her glasses. She would have rolled her eyes, she said softly. Then she would have smiled. Reporters came and went. Ryan avoided them. He stood at the edge of the clearing with Warden, watching the ridge breathe again as machinery was dismantled and hauled away. The black trucks descended at dusk, taillights glowing red against the snow like embers being carried off the mountain. Warden sat upright beside Ryan, ears relaxed now, tail sweeping slow, thoughtful arcs across the porch boards. Weeks passed. Repairs were made carefully, not to polish the house into something new, but to honor what it already was. The cedar planks were reinforced, not replaced. The basalt wall was sealed and stabilized, its shape left intact like a listening ear pressed to the earth. Below, the chamber was cleaned and reinforced, fitted with a viewing window so visitors could see without intruding. New sensors were installed at Mercer's insistence, but Edith's hydrophone remained at the center, unchanged, faintly glowing blue as if content to finally be heard. School buses climbed the ridge on clear days. Children bundled in bright jackets filed inside, voices hushed by instinct. Mercer explained pressure waves and water memory with a gentleness he rarely showed adults. Linda organized archival displays. Sarah handled permits with a precision that suggested she would never again file away a warning without a fight. Ryan moved through it all quietly. He fixed loose boards, shoveled paths, and learned how to rest without scanning for threats every second. At night, he sat on the porch with a mug warming his hands, watching snow drift down like ash. Warden lay beside him, dark sable coat stark against the white, breathing slow and even. The dog had saved lives without knowing it, then returned to stillness without needing praise. One evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the snow pale gold, the hydrophone hummed, not sharply, not urgently, softly. A low, steady resonance filled the chamber, gentle as a lullaby. Mercer stood very still, listening, eyes closed. "It's stabilizing," he said. "The pressure's evening out. The vein is recovering." Ryan placed his hand on the metal casing, feeling the vibration travel up his arm and settle somewhere deep in his chest. For years, he had lived with the sense that something inside him was always braced, always waiting for the next impact. In that moment, he felt at ease, just a little. Later that night, After the last visitors had gone, Ryan took a knife and knelt by the porch step. He carved slowly, deliberately, the way Edith might have written a note. The letters were simple, clean. Listen first. He brushed away the wood dust and leaned back, satisfied. Winter remained. Snow still fell. The world was not suddenly gentle, but the mountain no longer felt wounded. It felt at peace. Ryan stood there in the fading light, one hand resting on Warden's neck, the other tucked into the familiar pattern of his uniform. He thought of the man he had been, always moving, always running from silence, and the man he was now, standing still, listening, keeping watch not against enemies, but for balance. Warden lifted his head and looked up at him, amber eyes calm, trusting. Ryan smiled just a little. Home, he realized, was not a place that stopped danger from coming. It was a place that taught you how to stay when it did. The hydrophone hummed once more, deep and even, like a mountain finally allowed to sleep. And on the porch, beneath a sky bright with winter stars, a man and his dog rested together, no longer fleeing the past, but guarding something worth keeping. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come as a quiet warning, a loyal companion, or a moment where we finally choose to listen. In this story, the mountain spoke softly, and only those willing to listen could hear it. In our own lives, God often works the same way, not through noise, but through whispers, through instinct, through love, through people and moments placed in our path at exactly the right time. If you're watching this and carrying a burden, know this: you are not forgotten. You are not walking alone. And even when the road feels cold and uncertain, God is still guiding your steps. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what part stayed with you. And if you believe in stories of faith, loyalty, and quiet miracles, subscribe to the channel so we can walk this journey together. May God watch over you, protect your loved ones, and bless you with peace, even in the moments when the miracle feels almost too quiet to hear.